WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisCI to 44321.
John Henderson of Elkhorn is the Democratic candidate in the 31st Assembly District. The election is November 5th. John Henderson, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you for participating in our candidate interviews. I'll start by asking you, what's your campaign's key message? Why are you running?
Well, I was asked to run because of my experience and background. And my main thing would be to bring some collaboration back to the Assembly. We've had such a divided Assembly for so long now, which will change after November 5th with the redistricting. It's going to be pretty even. As it should be, we have a divided state. So hopefully, my goal is that we actually work together. And my background, I bring a lot of experience to the table. I ran my own business for 20 years, and so I've made payroll and all those things. And then I changed careers into commercial and corporate real estate on a global basis. So I bring a broad background to the table. Then that, particularly in the real estate business, that's all about bringing people together to find a solution. And I think that works in the Assembly too.
So if elected, what's an example of a bill that would be a priority for you to introduce?
Well, I think in the beginning, the first one I would look at is to try to actually work together to allow undocumented immigrants to get driver's licenses. The Republicans have fought that for years, and I'd much rather be on the road with people with a license and insurance than people driving because they have to drive, they have to get to work, they're working, and we're not protecting ourselves, so it doesn't make sense. So that'd be one of the first things.
So if you are elected, you're entering during a biennial budget year. The state's projected to have more than a $3 billion surplus. What would be your top two priorities for use of the surplus funding?
Well, number one, to actually release the funds for things that have already been approved. And there's quite a few of that have been stymied. So that's one. The other thing is that, I think we need to look at school funding to get that changed, although we'll cover that a little later probably. But and if, once we get through all the things that have already been approved and other priorities, if there's still a surplus, some tax refund could be possible.
What does a tax refund or any tax reform look like to you? Who is getting that?
Who's getting that? Well, I think what's really been a problem in the state because of the Act 10 really changed the way that schools could raise, and communities, but primarily schools could raise money. So everybody's going to a referendum, and there's hundreds of referendums on the ballot this November. The unfortunate part with that is all of referendum money goes on the property tax. And so it's skewed how schools are funded. So I think that's the main thing, is to reform our whole school funding formula again and get it back to something that makes more sense.
Speaking of K-12 education, it is a leading issue for many voters. You mentioned funding as a priority. Are there other things that really need to change within K-12 education?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to get back to allowing public employees to belong to unions. It's created such problems for schools because they are having trouble recruiting teachers and keeping teachers, and teachers just plainly are not able to speak up and for themselves. My wife was a employee for the Gateway Technical College for 30 years, most of which was in a union. At the end, when it was changing, people were not able to say anything, or they could be at risk of losing their job instead of actually working to make things better.
What about the state's higher education system? 4-year colleges, 2-year colleges, technical colleges. What does the future of that system look like to you? What should be done?
Well, I'm a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, so I want to keep that going for sure. It is our premier institution in Wisconsin. But we have a wonderful technical college system, and we've had, which is unusual. It's only a couple of states in the country that have that. But there's been problems there where people would take basic courses and then find out they wouldn't transfer to our own institutions at either 2 or 4 year colleges or universities, and they should be. So we need to make sure that that's working. Things are changing, and people have to be willing to change. So I know there's some of the 2-year schools that are either closing or having problems. The funding for that, I've read a lot about that, and it's complicated, I guess, to say the least. But we do need to work to make sure that what we're providing is what's needed for both our citizens and our workforce.
You support an increase in funding for the universities of Wisconsin system?
I would definitely support increase in funding. That, again, has been stymied for quite a while. But there needs to be limits, too. I mean, it's not a blank check. There needs to be good reasons.
What do you see as the state's largest workforce development challenge, and how do you propose to address it?
Well, I think on a workforce development, we've got to really work harder to find out what are the needs, where are the jobs actually are. So we're working to provide education that's actually going to be employable. But there's no education that's ever wasted. So you need a broad background of things, even if you're going to be in the trades. But we've done a lot. That's why our technical college system is so key to this, because they do provide education for the trades, for industry, and for the normal trades like electricians and carpenters and all that. But and where I live in Elkhorn, our school has actually had a wonderful program collaborating with local industries, including the trades and including manufacturing, that people get internships, and of course then there's you need apprenticeships, which is a big issue, and you can't export those jobs. If you're in the trades, you're not going to get an electrician from another country. It's going to come locally. So those are jobs that make a lot of money. They're very rewarding, and I think maybe for too long we're trying to send everybody to a 4-year school. And while that's very important, and many should, it's not the only path to success in life. A lot of times people were starting a 4-year school, finding out it wasn't for them, and had borrowed money to do it, and then found out they couldn't borrow more. So need more emphasis on what's right for the person before they head out.
Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. This also provides an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
Well, that's complicated too, because first you have to have people that are educated and trained enough to do those jobs. So I guess if there are people available, we certainly want to put priorities on that. I don't know if you can mandate that if there are not the people that can do it. I actually put solar on my house just because it's the right thing to do, and it's been great. One of the problems with solar is that and under the current thing, I generate a little more than I use, but I get paid hardly anything for what I generate and give back to the power company, and that doesn't seem right either.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this issue, and what do you think should be done about it?
I'm very aware of it because most of my career I was an independent contractor. Unfortunately for me, it worked out to my benefit because I was in a high earning profession, and I was in the real estate industry. Most people I was in corporate real estate, and it's different, but most of the agents, I'm going to pick on real estate because I know about it. Most of the typical real estate agents are independent contractors, but they're not making much money. And all the things you talked about that they're not getting are true. Plus, workman's compensation is a big issue. And that whole thing is just a loophole in the law that the Realtors Association pushed through a long time ago and probably needs to be changed. So that the same would be true of the trades where people are hiring, they need to be employees.
Affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin. Some support government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. What is your sense of housing as an issue, and which best addresses rental housing affordability? Is it rent control or building more rentals or some other solution?
Well, I don't believe in rent controls because it creates a marketplace that's just not accurate. But there are many and housing, not only apartment rent, but single family is a huge problem nationwide. There are many things that can be done to help build, and it's not going to be overnight because you have to build the property, and to have requirements for developers when they're doing a new single family subdivision or apartment. There needs to be a requirement for it to have some percentage of that be affordable, and that would help a lot. There are many other things that the state could do, and some we used to do. When I was first in real estate, the company I was with did do development. I wasn't involved in that, but there was a thing called special assessment B bonds that would allow a developer to borrow under the community's low interest rate at no risk to the community, and they would get the money then to do the infrastructure that's necessary to do development, whether it's apartments or single family. They could afford to do all the infrastructure, the roads and streets, the roads and sewer and water and electricity and everything goes into that up front, and not have to fund the money up front and not have to carry high interest on it while it's being developed. And then it got paid off as the lots were sold or the buildings were sold. So that was something similar to that needs to come back. But there's also, you can incentivize communities to actually do developments on their own. And they, again, could do that. Many communities own land that's sitting there and looking for developers that at present time can't afford to do it. They could partner with a developer, provide the land in a joint venture, so that, again, it cuts the cost down, and work with them to make a portion of that at least affordable. It's hard to define affordable.
Right. Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures? Well,
the first thing I would do is expand Medicaid, which is going to help a lot of people, and particularly maybe in the Driftless area or the northwest part of the state where we are really having problems with aging populations, declining populations, and a lack of medical care. I think with we've had over the last few years, all the mergers and expansions of our major health providers, I think if they get approval to do that, they should have to guarantee that they'll keep at least clinics open in the areas that are being underserved. And I think we can do that.
Do you support increasing the Medicaid reimbursement rate for hospitals?
I don't know if I can give an honest answer knowing what that is.
Mm-hmm. Mental health care is a growing concern for Wisconsinites and concern for state and county budgets. In your district, what are you hearing on this issue, and how would you address mental health care?
Well, I think it's really an issue in our schools, particularly high schools, but even in elementary. And many schools don't have the health or mental health professionals on board or even available. So I think we need to incentivize getting more mental health people that are qualified to provide service to the public and to schools. But there's a huge problem with mental health right now in our high schools, and it's so different than when I went to school. It was not the same issues, and we have so many things that are affecting our children now. So I think overall we need definitely to have more mental health professionals, and you have to find a way to incentivize people to go into the field that are qualified.
How should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion?
Well, my view on abortion is that I would very much like Wisconsin to be where Roe v. Wade was before it was repealed.
What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these needs are addressed, and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of our aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce?
I think in where I live, in my district, roads are being improved right now. In fact, I have my cottage up north from my house takes me 8 minutes, Well, it took quite a bit longer this summer because the road's under construction, and it seems like everywhere you turn, roads are under construction. And I think that's a great credit to the fact that we had the infrastructure bill. And I don't know how many times we could drive to Florida and back, Governor Evers said, from the roads that have already been rebuilt or are being rebuilt. So I don't see that as a big problem right now. I think it's been addressed and will continue to be.
PFAS and other water contaminants are a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites. Do you see this as an important issue, and how would you propose to address it?
It's very important. And much of it's coming from our agricultural industry. So we need to work with that industry to make sure that things are being done to prevent the chemicals from getting into the ground to start with. And they affect a lot of things. There's a village in my district, Walworth, that had a failing well, and then they also had a well that was contaminated with PFAS. They don't have the money to get the equipment that's needed, because it can be cleaned up, but it's very expensive to buy the filtration equipment. They don't have the money to do it, so people now are, I think, drinking contaminated water, even though it's. So we need to provide from the state and probably federal money to at least help those communities do that, to keep the water clean. But the more important is to work upstream and stop the source. The other thing, it affects our tourism industry also. It's created algae blooms. Lake Geneva had to shut. That's a tourist place and best tourist place in Wisconsin. They had to shut their beach down because of algae blooms this summer. It was all due to PFAS.
We are down to our final two questions. How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
Well, I think one is that I am experienced. My opponent has really never had much of a job other than being an assemblyman. And not that that's a bad thing, but I bring real-world experience and to the table. And I think that I'm going to show up. He's not done anything to be elected because of the gerrymandering, and doesn't show up. I went to a event in Rock County with the Farm Bureau, and everyone was there except my opponent. He doesn't show up. He feels he doesn't have to. So I think I'm going to be more responsive. And when people would write a letter to him, they didn't get a form letter back, no response. So I think the answer is I'll be responsive, and I'm going to be representing all of my constituents, not just the ones that vote for me.
Final question. Let's say you're elected this fall. You get a magic wand you can use in the state capitol to resolve one issue in a way that brings all parties, all people together. What is that issue?
Oh, what's the issue? I think you could pick anyone, and that's exactly what my goal is, that the elected officials will put country over party and actually work together to solve whatever issues there are. I think school funding is a big one, though.
Well, thank you, John Henderson of Elkhorn, the Democratic candidate for the 31st Assembly District. The election is November 5th. John Henderson, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.